Hello, everyone. My name is Doug Stapleton. I'm the Associate Curator of Art here at the Illinois State Museum, and I'm here to talk to you about the Human Nature exhibit that is currently on view in our galleries on the second floor at the Springfield Museum. Human Nature, with a subtitle, The Weight of Our Actions on the Natural World, brings together Illinois artists who are speaking about a relationship that we have with the natural world, and specifically that relationship to the idea of sustenance. What it is that we take from the world? And how do we see that? Is that a relationship that we have? Or do we see these resources as endless and something that's only just for our benefit? So the questions I was asking was about, the main question was about, do we see ourselves as connected or separate from the natural world? And these artists and their artworks that I've selected look at our perceptions and beliefs about this relationship to the natural world and the consequences of our actions. So I was working with some definitions, which is always a great way to start with a project. And one of the first things was resource. What is a resource? It's those things that we draw upon to function. It's also the way that we take action, in maybe in a difficult situation, like being resourceful. And it's also those things that are provided that are necessary for something to work or operate functionally. These are all the very driest definitions, which really aren't very interesting, but they were kind of percolating in the back of my head. But also the word relationship, the way we connect and behave towards each other, and extending that to the way we behave and connect with the world around us, which is kind of a definition of ecology, because that talks about the relationship of organisms to one another and also to their physical surroundings. So what it really comes down to with ecology is this concept of human ecology, that interrelated, dependent relationship between humans and our natural, but also our built and our social world, our social constructions. Again, a fairly dry definition, but way that this discipline of human ecology works is that they often look to the extreme interactions in these relationships, sort of pointing out where things have kind of gotten to maybe a little gone too far. So just quickly, I want to show you a few of the artists that are in this exhibit. Barbara Curry and Lindsay Lockman use processed foods to create these colorful, vibrant landscapes. And these photographs are meant to prompt us to think about mass-produced sort of corporate products that we use to fuel our bodies. And they're basing this on their compositions on historic photographs by Carlton Watkins, one of those westward expansion photographers who was working during the survey projects during the 19th century. But that's sort of more like their formal information of their pieces. But what they're really, really interested in is this idea about like processed foods. And they create these constructions in their studio to accentuate the idea of how the corporate world uses enormous resources to market color and shape and smell, to design foods to appeal to us as consumers. It's a cautionary tale. And really what it talks about is how far removed are we from the source of our foods? And what they said was that while they're raising their children, here's a quote from them from an interview, is about balancing between cooking and time saving. And this was a very, very critical sort of social construction of human ecology. And it's also a critical point of view within their photographs. And I hope you have a chance to come and see those. By comparison, there's some parallel ideas that were bouncing back and forth between these artists. Hector Duarte, a Chicago artist originally from Mexico, did this very large scale, almost 10-foot wood block print, which is looking at the idea of the dangers of corporately controlled, genetically modified corn, and how that represents a disruption or an imbalance to the traditional knowledge and relationship with agriculture that he knew growing up in central Mexico. So again, this idea about the belief and the relationship we have with the natural world, both as a consumer product, but what we believe about it, what we feel about it, what we understand. We sort of refer to this as traditional and ancestral knowledge. And Jin Lee, who's a photographer from Bloomington, Illinois, takes a much quieter approach. Her photographs in this exhibition ask us a question about how do we see the whole environment with our sort of limited vision, sort of seeing the forest for the trees, or in this case, seeing a pile of salt and taking it for a mountain. She's interested in scale, taking a view of the world that removes us from, that looks at things around us in the world from the point of view of our narrow focus as humans, but how do we see the larger landscape? Here's a quote from her about her interest. It's not about seeing the landscape from a distance, but it's about being in direct relationship to something before us, something that we can have a direct relationship with. And one of the things that she does is photograph weeds that she finds in a sort of urban context, those tenacious plants that come up in the cracks and corners. And here she talks about them as portraits, something that she admires. And as a portrait, it's something that we can see as another individual, us in relationship to this plant. Again, returning to the idea of ancestral knowledge, indigenous knowledge, Nora Moore Lloyd, her installation is called Birch Bark Wigwas. And she is an Ojibwe artist who braids stories of birch bark harvesting with the relationship between her ancestors and their traditional knowledge with the present day concerns of indigenous people of the Great Lakes region. And her installation honors the indigenous environmental knowledge and the practice of birch bark harvesting in the Great Lakes, especially by the Potawatomi and Ojibwe nations in the Chicago area, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And for her, it is a ancestral, traditional way of seeing your relationship with the land. And here's a quote from her about how we have this impact, we build upon and create new paths in the work that we do in relationship to the world. And it's also something that she is very clear about, that this is not an ancient history, but these postcards and photographs that she's working with from a local historical society are placing indigenous representation and presence in the upper Midwest within 100 years. And these are her grandparents, her great-grandparents. So we're not talking about the distant past, but we're talking about the recent history, and we're talking about contemporary indigenous knowledge. Here's one of her photographs showing the harvesting marks of the birch bark, and here is an object that you'll see in the exhibition also coming, that is made of birch bark, which is also on view. And finally, Laura Fosberg, much of the work in the exhibition is looking at how we are in relationship to the natural world, but we rarely talk about our own vulnerability. And in her diagrams, these really very funny drawings that she does, she talks about what we need to survive in a wilderness. And they seem sort of authoritative, but they're really sort of unreliable survivalist guides. Because as you'll see if you come to see these, that these diagrams don't give us a lot of help. But what they do talk about is our vulnerability to the elements. And she sort of spells out these limitations in succinct adages that remind us that we are part of an ecological system that impacts us as well. So I hopefully, with this brief introduction, that'll spark your interest to come see the exhibition. It is up through the end of January 2022, and I really thank you for your time.